Picture this.
Under the umbrella codenamed Upshot Knothole is set off.
It's 3 a.m., you're half asleep on your couch, the TV is still on, and suddenly a man with gravity-defying hair looks directly into your soul and says with absolute confidence, "I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens." And in that exact moment, something inside you breaks, not dramatically, not all at once, but just enough to make you question everything you thought you knew about history, television, and the basic concept of evidence. Because according to ancient aliens, the pyramids weren't built by Egyptians. Stonehenge wasn't built by ancient Britons.
We were building pyramids. Sumeria was created.
And your Wi-Fi cutting out earlier today was probably orchestrated by extraterrestrials who got bored halfway through installing fiber optic cables in 4000 before Christ. This was the promise. This was the pitch. A show that didn't just ask questions, but aggressively answered them with the confidence of a guy who read half a Wikipedia article and decided he was now qualified to rewrite human history. And somehow, it worked. Because Ancient Aliens didn't present itself as a joke. It wasn't framed as sci-fi or parody. No, this was history. Literally. The History Channel.
All those different high achievements were done.
The same network that once gave us World War II documentaries decided that what we really needed was a deep dive into whether Leonardo da Vinci was reverse engineering alien spacecraft between painting sessions.
Tampering with our DNA. So we're half human and half extraterrestrial.
And the craziest part, people believed it. Or at least they wanted to believe it. Because who wouldn't prefer a universe where ancient civilizations had cosmic help, rather than one where humans, flawed, chaotic, deeply weird humans, somehow managed to build incredible things all on their own? But that's where the cracks begin. Because once you start replacing history with what if aliens did it, you're not just telling a story anymore. You're creating a world where every unanswered question has the same answer. Aliens. And when everything is aliens, nothing is.
The ancient alien theory is the fact that we can compare modern achievements.
And that right there is where things start to fall apart. Long before Ancient Aliens became that 3 a.m. fever dream you accidentally binge while questioning your life choices, it actually had something that looked like
to create a two-headed dog with 6 legs.
Credibility, or at least the aesthetic of it. Because the idea didn't start on cable TV. It started in 1968 with a book that basically asked one question. What if everything we don't understand is aliens? That book was Chariots of the Gods by Eric von Däniken. And instead of treating ancient civilizations as impressive, it treated them as suspicious. Because clearly, if something looks advanced, humans couldn't have done it. Must be extraterrestrials. No evidence required, just confidence. And for decades, that idea just sat there, waiting, until 2009, when History Channel looked at its lineup of actual history and thought,
a similar creature existed thousands of years ago, and I say yes.
You know what this needs? Aliens. What started as a 2-hour special quickly turned into a full series by 2010, produced by Prometheus Entertainment. And somehow, it just kept going. Over 20 seasons, hundreds of episodes, like a theory that refuses to die. Because here's the thing, it worked.
Some of the monuments were built with the help of acoustic levitation.
The show took real historical places, pyramids, temples, ancient cities, and wrapped them in dramatic music, fast cuts, and experts with titles that sound impressive until you realize they basically invented them. And then came the formula. Take a real mystery, add ominous music, introduce an ancient astronaut theorist, ask, could it be that extraterrestrials visited Earth thousands of years ago? And before you even process the question, the show hits you with 5 increasingly absurd connections in rapid succession. At some point, your brain just gives up. Sure, aliens built everything. And just like that, Ancient Aliens wasn't just a show anymore. It was a phenomenon. It dominated the network. It kept getting renewed. It survived time slots, criticism, and logic itself. But the real turning point? The internet. Because while the show was trying to present itself as groundbreaking, the internet saw something else entirely. A man with wild hair, a single word, aliens. And just like that, the show stopped being taken seriously and started becoming immortal for completely different reasons. At first, the cracks were small, almost charming even.
Stones were transported by way of levitation.
The kind of cracks you ignore because the house still looks good from the outside. Because in the early seasons, Ancient Aliens still had that thin layer of maybe. It asked questions, it played with possibilities, it danced around the absurd without fully committing to it. But then it stopped dancing. It sprinted.
Is such a thing even possible? Yes, it is.
Because somewhere along the way, the show realized something incredibly important. Asking, could it be, is entertaining, but confidently answering, it definitely is, keeps people watching. And so the tone shifted, subtly at first, then all at once. What used to be speculation turned into certainty.
The world believe we have been visited in the past by extraterrestrial beings.
What used to be curiosity turned into a 44-minute TED Talk delivered by people who introduce themselves as ancient astronaut theorists, which is a title that sounds impressive until you realize it's basically self-assigned. And that's when the internet stepped in. Because while the show was escalating its claims, the audience was evolving. Viewers weren't just watching anymore. They were clipping, remixing, memeing, and out of that chaos, a cultural icon was born. Giorgio Tsoukalos, the man, the hair, the human embodiment of the word aliens. Suddenly, the show wasn't just a show, it was a punchline. The meme, I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens, spread like wildfire. It didn't matter if you had never seen the show. You knew the face, you knew the vibe, and more importantly, you knew the joke, because the joke was simple. No matter the question, the answer was always aliens. Crop circles? Aliens. The Nazca lines? Aliens.
The only way the ancient astronaut theory can be disproven is when the extraterrestrials show up.
Why your phone battery dies at 20%? Honestly, probably aliens. And here's the problem. Once your show becomes a meme, you don't control the narrative anymore. The audience does. And the audience had decided that Ancient Aliens wasn't groundbreaking, it was hilarious. But the show didn't get the memo. Instead of pulling back, it doubled down, hard. Episodes started connecting dots that weren't just far apart. They were in entirely different universes. Ancient Egypt was linked to Mesoamerica. Biblical stories were reinterpreted as alien encounters. Leonardo da Vinci, Nikola Tesla, basically anyone who ever had an original thought, clearly influenced by extraterrestrial beings who apparently specialize in Renaissance art and early electrical engineering. And the editing. Rapid fire claims, dramatic pauses, ominous music swelling in the background as someone says, mainstream archaeologists refuse to consider this possibility, which sounds rebellious and edgy until you realize that mainstream archaeologists are just people who require evidence before rewriting human history.
Of advancement, but what they did have is advanced mythology.
Critics started noticing, loudly. Scientific communities didn't just disagree with the show, they actively called it out. Articles described it as a mix of fabrications and lies, pointing out how it presents speculation as fact and overwhelms viewers with a barrage of misleading information. Historians argued that it wasn't just wrong, it was harmful. Because beneath all the alien talk, there was an uncomfortable implication that ancient civilizations couldn't have achieved greatness on their own, which, when you really think about it, is less mysterious sci-fi theory and more accidentally insulting entire cultures. And then came the numbers. For a while, the show was unstoppable. It dominated ratings. It became one of the flagship programs of the network. But nothing burns forever, not even a show powered by intergalactic speculation. By 2019, viewership had started to drop significantly, with some episodes pulling in under 1 million viewers.
Extreme scholars believe the depiction is of King Pakal on a journey to the underworld.
Why? Because eventually, even the most entertaining nonsense starts to feel repetitive. There are only so many times you can watch a narrator ask, could it be that ancient civilizations were visited by extraterrestrials? Before your brain starts auto-completing the answer and emotionally checking out. And yet, the show kept going. New seasons, new spin-offs, more theories, more connections, more moments where someone points at a rock formation and says with absolute conviction, this was clearly a landing site. Meanwhile, the internet had fully embraced the chaos. According to research, the term ancient aliens was mentioned over 1 million times on Twitter, often alongside hashtags like #aliens, #UFO, and #pseudohistory. And the tone? Let's just say it wasn't always supportive. Memes exploded. TikTok trends turned the concept into comedy gold. Entire Reddit threads were dedicated to debunking episodes in real time. The show had become a shared cultural experience, but not in the way it originally intended. It wasn't inspiring awe anymore. It was inspiring sarcasm. And yet, in a strange twist, That's also what kept it alive. Because even as people laughed at it, they kept watching. Even as critics tore it apart, it remained part of the conversation. It became this bizarre hybrid of entertainment and parody, where the line between "this is ridiculous" and "I kind of love this" started to blur. But every empire has a tipping point. And for Ancient Aliens, that tipping point wasn't one big scandal or one catastrophic episode. It was something much simpler. Exhaustion, viewer exhaustion, idea exhaustion. The slow realization that the mystery wasn't getting deeper, it was just getting louder.
Covered 4 very large stone heads in the Olmec area of Mesoamerica.
Because when every answer is aliens, the question stops mattering. And once the question stops mattering, the entire show starts to collapse under the weight of its own certainty. So here we are, over a decade later, more than 20 seasons in, hundreds of episodes deep, and somehow Ancient Aliens is still asking the exact same question it asked in 2009, with the exact same answer: aliens. Because the biggest problem with the show now isn't just that it's wrong, it's that it's predictable. There used to be at least some sense of mystery, the idea that maybe there were gaps in our understanding of history, but now there are no gaps left. Every episode follows the same formula. Introduce a historical site, add dramatic lighting, bring in an expert, ask if extraterrestrials could have been involved, and then immediately answer that question with complete certainty. And once you've seen that a few times, you've basically seen every episode. It stops feeling like a mystery and starts feeling like an assembly line, mass producing the same conclusion with slightly different visuals. Aliens built this. Aliens influenced that. Aliens were apparently very busy between 3000 BC and last Tuesday. And the audience knows it. What used to feel intriguing now feels like background noise, something you don't watch to learn, but just to zone out.
Evidence can be found, etched in stone throughout Mesoamerica.
It's comfort food for people who want the aesthetic of mystery without the inconvenience of critical thinking. And the show leans into that by treating skepticism like a personality flaw, as if not believing it just means you're not open-minded enough, which is ironic because questioning things is literally how knowledge works. But Ancient Aliens doesn't really deal in knowledge. It deals in vibes, and those vibes haven't changed in over a decade. The tone, the pacing, even the dramatic pauses all feel identical. Like the show is just waiting for you to mentally fill in the word aliens before it even says it. It's not a mystery anymore, it's a routine, and routines get old. Even the broader context has changed. When the show first aired, this kind of conspiracy-adjacent content felt harmless, almost playful. But now, after years of misinformation and people genuinely believing increasingly absurd things, it hits differently. What used to feel silly now feels a bit irresponsible. Because if you blur the line between entertainment and fact long enough,
and it sets the stage for Hanapakal himself, who becomes king at a very early age,
people stop seeing the line altogether. And this show has been doing that for years. The strange part is that it's still going, still producing episodes, still stretching the same idea in slightly different directions, but survival isn't the same as relevance. Culturally, the show has already been redefined, just not by its creators. It's no longer seen as a serious historical series. It's the meme, the screenshot, the reaction image you send when something makes no sense. And maybe that's the final irony, because in trying to explain everything, Ancient Aliens ended up explaining itself. It was never really about history. It was about how far you can push an idea before people stop taking it seriously, and somehow it pushed just far enough to become something else entirely. Not informative, not credible, just entertaining in completely the wrong way. And maybe that's the strangest part of all this, because for a moment, just a brief, weird, late-night TV kind of moment, Ancient Aliens almost worked. Not as history, not as science, but as a kind of modern mythology, a story that turned confusion into spectacle, that gave people something bigger, stranger, and honestly more entertaining than reality. It took the gaps in our knowledge and filled them with something cosmic, something dramatic, something that made the universe feel a little less random and a lot more scripted. But that illusion only works if you don't overplay it. And Ancient Aliens didn't just overplay it, it turned the volume all the way up and broke the knob. Because once every mystery has the same answer, it stops being magical. It becomes lazy, predictable, almost comforting in the worst possible way, like a magician who reveals the same trick over and over until you're not
Kind of breathing apparatus that's going on in front of his nose.
amazed anymore, just mildly concerned. And yet, people still watch. Maybe not because they believe it, but because it's familiar, because it's become part of internet culture, part of that shared understanding that sometimes the most ridiculous explanations are also the most entertaining. So no, Ancient Aliens didn't completely fail. It just evolved into something else. Not a groundbreaking documentary series, but a cultural inside joke that somehow outlived its own premise. And maybe that says more about us than it does about the show. Because if we're being honest, we didn't just watch it for answers. We watched it because deep down, a tiny part of us liked the idea that maybe, just maybe, the universe is a little more absurd than we thought. Or at the very least, better at storytelling. Anyway, like, subscribe, and tell us which show we should blame on aliens next.